In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek, life moved at a leisurely pace. The neighborhood was the kind you'd see on postcards, perfectly trimmed lawns, flower beds bursting with color, and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes down winding roads, neighbors exchanged warm greetings over fences, and everyone seemed to know each other's names. But beneath this picture-perfect exterior, there was an undercurrent of tension, a simmering conflict that had been building for years. At the heart of it all was Karen Whitmore, a woman whose name had become synonymous with rules and regulations. Karen wasn't just any homeowner. She was the unofficial queen of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a group tasked with maintaining the neighborhood's pristine appearance. To Karen, the HOA wasn't just about enforcing guidelines. It was her personal mission to ensure that every blade of grass, every paint color, and every parked car adhered to what she believed was the right way. She patrolled the streets like a soldier guarding sacred ground, armed with a clipboard and an unshakable belief that order was the key to happiness. Karen's obsession with perfection made her both admired and feared. Some neighbors appreciated her dedication to keeping Willow Creek beautiful, while others found her constant nitpicking exhausting. Her infamous temper tantrums over minor infractions, like a mailbox painted the wrong shade of blue or a garden gnome placed too close to the sidewalk, had earned her the nickname HOA Karen behind her back. Still, no one dared challenge her openly, fearing the wrath of her sharp tongue and endless emails. Into this tightly controlled world came Jake Thompson, a newcomer with a laid-back attitude and a passion for restoring old vehicles. Jake had recently purchased a cozy house on Maple Lane, drawn to Willow Creek by its charm and proximity to his mechanic shop. Unlike many of his neighbors, Jake didn't care much for appearances. He wore grease-stained jeans, drove a beat-up sedan, and spent most of his free time tinkering with engines in his garage. But what truly set him apart from the rest of the neighborhood was his prized possession, a fully restored 1972 Ford F-100 pickup truck. The truck was more than just a vehicle to Jake. It was a piece of history, a symbol of hard work, and a testament to his skill as a mechanic. Its glossy red paint gleamed in the sunlight and its chrome accents sparkled like jewels. Every curve and detail told a story of countless hours spent sanding, welding, and polishing. For Jake, the truck represented freedom and creativity, two things he cherished deeply. So naturally, when he moved into Willow Creek, he couldn't wait to show off his masterpiece to his new neighbors. However, not everyone shared Jake's enthusiasm. From the moment the truck rolled onto Maple Lane, Karen's eyes narrowed with disapproval. To her, the vintage vehicle was an eyesore, a relic of a bygone era that clashed horribly with the modern elegance of the neighborhood. Sure, it was shiny and well-maintained, but it was also big, loud, and utterly out of place. And then there was the matter of parking. Jake's driveway, narrow and sloped, couldn't accommodate the truck, so he often left it parked on the street, outside his house. At first, Karen tried to handle the situation diplomatically. She left polite notes tucked under the truck's windshield wiper, reminding Jake of the HOA's aesthetic guidelines and suggesting he find a more suitable spot for his vehicle. But Jake, busy with work and oblivious to Karen's growing irritation, simply tossed the notes without giving them much thought. After all, he reasoned, the truck wasn't blocking anyone, and it certainly wasn't violating any actual laws. Why should he care what Karen thought? As the days turned into weeks, Karen's frustration reached a boiling point. She began attending HOA meetings armed with photos of the truck, pointing out how its presence disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood. It's not just about one person, she argued passionately. It's about setting a standard. If we allow this monstrosity to stay, what's next? A parade of rust buckets? Where do we draw the line? Her pleas fell on deaf ears. Most of the HOA members shrugged off her complaints, unwilling to pick a fight over something as trivial as a parked truck. Even those who agreed with her privately admitted that taking action might cause unnecessary drama. Undeterred, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She convinced herself that drastic measures were necessary, not just for the sake of the neighborhood, but for her own sanity. And so, One fateful evening, while Jake was away picking up parts for another restoration project, Karen made her move. Pacing back and forth in front of the truck, she dialed the number of a local towing company. With a mix of guilt and determination, she explained that the vehicle had been abandoned and needed to be removed immediately. The operator, unaware of the real story, dispatched a tow truck within minutes. By the time Jake returned home later that night, the space where his beloved truck had stood was empty. Panic surged through him as he frantically searched the area, hoping against hope that it was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. His stomach churned as he realized someone had deliberately taken his truck, and he had a pretty good idea who was responsible. Little did Jake know, this incident would set off a chain of events that would shake Willow Creek to its core. What started as a simple disagreement over parking would soon spiral into a battle of wills, testing the limits of forgiveness, pride, and humanity itself. The stage was set, and the players were ready, but none of them could have predicted the twists and turns that lay ahead. Jake's heart sank as he stared at the empty space where his prized truck had been parked just hours earlier. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't imagined someone would go so far as to tow it away. His mind raced through possibilities, but one name kept surfacing: Karen Whitmore. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the anger bubbling inside him. For all her talk about rules and order, this felt personal, a direct attack on something he loved. Determined to get answers, Jake stormed over to Karen's house the next morning. Her home was immaculate, as always, with perfectly aligned flower pots lining the porch and not a single leaf out of place in the yard. Jake rang the doorbell twice before Karen finally appeared, dressed in her signature crisp blouse and khakis, clipboard tucked under her arm. She looked surprised to see him at first, but her expression quickly shifted to smug satisfaction when she noticed the fury in his eyes. "Where is it?" Jake demanded, cutting straight to the point. "What did you do with my truck?" Karen crossed her arms, feigning innocence. "I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about," she said coolly, though the corner of her mouth twitched ever so slightly. "Don't play dumb," Jake shot back. "You called someone to tow it last night, didn't you? Admit it." For a moment, Karen hesitated, perhaps weighing whether denying it would make things worse, but then her pride took over. "Fine," she snapped, her voice rising. "Yes, I called the towing company, and I'd do it again if I had to. That thing doesn't belong here. It's an eyesore, Jake. You can't just park it on the street like that. There are rules for a reason." "Rules?" Jake echoed incredulously. "What rules? Last I checked, there's no law against parking a vehicle on the street. Your precious HOA guidelines aren't exactly binding, Karen." "That's not the point," Karen retorted, her face flushing red. "It's about respect. For your neighbors, for the community. People worked hard to make Willow Creek beautiful, and you're ruining it with your junkyard project." The argument quickly escalated, drawing the attention of several passers-by. Neighbors who were out walking their dogs or watering their lawns stopped to watch the spectacle unfold. Some whispered among themselves, while others openly sided with one party or the other. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman from across the street, shook her head disapprovingly. "Such a shame," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. This used to be such a peaceful neighborhood. Meanwhile, Mr. Patel, a younger homeowner who lived 2 doors down, chimed in with a chuckle. "Honestly, Karen, it's just a truck. It's not hurting anyone." His comment earned him a glare from Karen, who turned her nose up as if offended by his very presence. Jake, however, wasn't in the mood for banter. He stepped closer to Karen, his voice low but firm. "Listen, Karen. That truck means more to me than you'll ever understand. It's not some junkyard project. It's part of who I am. If you've got a problem with it, fine. But taking it without permission? That's crossing a line." Karen squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. "Oh, spare me the dramatics, Jake. You think you're special because you restored some old heap of metal? Newsflash. Nobody cares. All I care about is protecting the integrity of this neighborhood. And if that means getting rid of distractions, like your truck, so be it." Her words stung, but Jake refused to let her see how much they affected him. Instead, he took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. "All right, Karen, have it your way. But mark my words, you're going to regret this." With that, he turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Karen standing on her porch, triumphant but uneasy. As the crowd dispersed, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she might have pushed things too far. Still, she convinced herself it was worth it. After all, she was doing what was best for the neighborhood, or so she told herself. Later, that day, Jake tracked down the towing company using the license plate number and discovered that his truck had been impounded. The cost to retrieve it was steep, thanks to administrative fees and storage charges. While he could afford it, the principle of the matter gnawed at him. How dare Karen take something that didn't belong to her and claim it was for the greater good? Fueled by indignation, Jake decided to fight back. He started digging into local laws and regulations, determined to prove that Karen's actions were not only unethical, but potentially illegal. He scoured online forums, consulted with friends who knew a thing or two about property rights, and even reached out to a lawyer for advice. What he found gave him hope. Private citizens couldn't authorize the towing of vehicles unless they posed a legitimate safety hazard, and a legally parked truck clearly didn't qualify. Armed with this knowledge, Jake filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, attaching evidence from security camera footage that showed Karen lurking near his truck shortly before it disappeared. He also circulated a petition among his neighbors, asking them to support his case against Karen's heavy-handed tactics. To his surprise, many people signed willingly, eager to voice their frustration with her domineering behavior. Word of Jake's counterattack spread quickly, turning the incident into the talk of the town. Some neighbors admired his tenacity, seeing him as a champion for individuality in a cookie-cutter world. Others sided with Karen, believing that rules existed for a reason and that Jake should have known better than to provoke her. Tensions ran high, dividing Willow Creek into two camps, Team Jake and Team Karen. Despite the growing rift, Jake remained focused on his goal. He knew this wasn't just about reclaiming his truck. It was about standing up for himself and sending a message that bullying wouldn't be tolerated. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, he felt truly invested in the community. Not because of its manicured lawns or HOA guidelines, but because of the people who lived there. He wanted to show them that it was possible to coexist without sacrificing personal freedom. As for Karen, the backlash caught her off guard. Emails poured into the HOA inbox criticizing her actions, and whispers followed her wherever she went. For someone who prided herself on being liked and respected, the sudden shift in public opinion was jarring. She tried brushing it off, telling herself that she was doing the right thing, but doubt crept in nonetheless. Had she gone too far? Was her obsession with control really worth alienating her neighbors? The question lingered in her mind as she sat alone in her living room that evening, staring at the stack of angry emails on her laptop. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her meticulously maintained lawn. For the first time in years, Karen felt uncertain about her decisions, about her role in the neighborhood, and about the future of Willow Creek itself. Unbeknownst to either of them, fate had plans to intervene in ways neither Jake nor Karen could have anticipated. Little did they know, the storm brewing between them was nothing compared to the literal storm that would soon sweep through Willow Creek, testing their resilience and forcing them to confront their differences in ways they never expected. The days that followed were tense, with the entire neighborhood buzzing about the escalating feud between Jake and Karen. Conversations at the coffee shop, the grocery store, and even during casual walks revolved around whose side people should take. Some admired Jake's determination to stand up for himself, while others felt sympathy for Karen, believing she was simply trying to uphold the standards that made Willow Creek special. Despite the growing divide, life in the suburb continued, until nature decided to step in and remind everyone just how fragile their perfect world really was. It started with an ominous weather forecast. Meteorologists warned of a massive storm system moving into the region, bringing torrential rain, high winds, and potential flooding. At first, Most residents dismissed it as typical late summer drama, assuming the worst they'd face was a soggy backyard or a few fallen branches. But as the hours ticked by, the skies darkened ominously, and the air grew thick with humidity. By nightfall, the rain began, a relentless downpour that showed no signs of stopping. Jake had spent the afternoon preparing for the storm, securing loose tools in his garage and moving outdoor furniture inside. He wasn't particularly worried. His house sat on slightly elevated ground, making it less vulnerable to flooding. Still, he kept an eye on the news, watching updates about rising water levels in nearby creeks and rivers. As the hours passed, reports came in of roads turning into rivers and basements filling with water. The situation was worse than anyone had anticipated. Karen, meanwhile, watched the storm unfold from her living room window, clutching a cup of tea to calm her nerves. Her house, located near the lowest point of the neighborhood, had always been prone to minor flooding during heavy rains, but this time felt different. The rain pounded against her roof like a drum roll, and the sound of rushing water echoed through the streets outside. She tried to reassure herself that everything would be fine, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Around midnight, the power went out, plunging Willow Creek into darkness. Without electricity, the hum of appliances and the glow of streetlights disappeared, leaving only the deafening roar of the storm. Karen lit a few candles and grabbed a flashlight, determined to stay calm. She checked her phone for updates, but the signal was spotty at best. Frustrated and increasingly anxious, she decided to inspect her basement, hoping to catch any leaks before they became a problem. As she descended the creaky wooden stairs, the beam of her flashlight revealed puddles forming on the cold concrete floor. Water seeped in through cracks in the foundation, pooling steadily around her feet. Panic set in as she realized the sump pump, a crucial piece of equipment designed to prevent flooding, wasn't working. Whether it was due to the power outage or some mechanical failure, she didn't know. All she knew was that the water was rising fast, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Desperate to salvage what she could, Karen waded deeper into the basement, sloshing through ankle-deep water toward a stack of boxes containing family heirlooms and important documents. She managed to grab a few items before disaster struck. In her haste, she slipped on the wet floor, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her leg and she cried out, but the sound was drowned out by the storm raging above. When she tried to get up, she realized she was stuck. A shelf filled with canned goods and cleaning supplies had toppled over, pinning her leg beneath its weight. No matter how hard she pushed or pulled, she couldn't free herself. The water continued to rise, now reaching her knees, and the cold gnawed at her skin. Her heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, praying for a signal, but the screen remained blank, taunting her with its inability to connect. Alone and terrified, Karen called out for help, though she doubted anyone could hear her over the storm. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about all the times she'd alienated her neighbors, all the arguments she'd won at the expense of relationships. What if no one came looking for her? What if this was how it ended? Trapped in her own home, surrounded by the very things she'd fought so hard to control. Meanwhile, miles away, or so it seemed, Jake lay awake in bed, listening to the storm rage outside. Sleep eluded him as he replayed the events of the past few days in his mind. He still burned with anger over the truck incident, but something nagged at him. A faint sense of guilt, perhaps, or maybe just lingering curiosity about whether Karen was okay. After all, her house was known to flood during heavy rains, and given the severity of the storm, it wouldn't surprise him if she needed help. At first, Jake dismissed the thought. Why should he care? Karen had gone out of her way to ruin his life, and he owed her nothing. But as the minutes dragged on, he found himself unable to ignore the voice in his head urging him to check on her. It wasn't about forgiveness or redemption. It was about doing the right thing even when it was hard. Sighing, he threw on a jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out into the chaos. The journey to Karen's house was treacherous. Streets had transformed into rivers, forcing Jake to navigate carefully to avoid being swept off his feet. Branches littered the road and the wind whipped fiercely, threatening to knock him over. Every step felt like a battle, but he pressed on, driven by a mix of stubbornness and concern. When he finally reached Karen's driveway, the scene was grim. Water pooled in the yard, lapping at the foundation of the house. Jake knocked loudly on the front door, shouting her name, but there was no response. Undeterred, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. Pushing the door open, he stepped inside, calling out again. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Guided by his flashlight, Jake explored the ground floor, finding no trace of Karen. Then he noticed the faint sound of splashing coming from below. His stomach tightened as he realized where she might be. Taking a deep breath, he descended the stairs leading to the basement, bracing himself for whatever awaited him. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Karen sat slumped against the wall, soaked to the bone and visibly shaken. Her leg was pinned beneath the fallen shelf, and the water had risen to her waist. For a moment their eyes met, and Jake saw a mixture of fear, shame, and gratitude flash across her face. Despite everything that had happened between them, she looked small and vulnerable, stripped of her usual bravado. Without hesitation, Jake sprang into action. He set his flashlight down, creating a makeshift beacon of light, and began assessing the situation. Using tools from his emergency kit, a crowbar and a wrench, he worked quickly to dismantle the debris trapping Karen. The task was difficult, requiring strength and precision, but Jake refused to give up. Every groan of wood and splash of water fueled his determination to save her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Karen was free. She collapsed forward, gasping for air, as Jake helped her to her feet. Together, they waded back upstairs, each step slow and deliberate. Once they reached the safety of the living room, Jake wrapped her in a blanket and handed her a bottle of water he'd brought along. They sat together in silence, the storm still raging outside, both too exhausted to speak. For Karen, the experience was humbling. She had spent years dictating how others should live, enforcing rules and demanding perfection. Yet here she was, saved by the very person she had wronged. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she glanced at Jake, who sat quietly beside her, she felt a wave of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Regret, vulnerability, and maybe even a glimmer of hope. Jake, for his part, didn't gloat or lecture. He simply stayed by her side, ensuring she was safe until help arrived. Though he couldn't forget what Karen had done, he recognized that holding on to resentment wouldn't change anything. Sometimes life gave you second chances, and tonight, it seemed, fate had offered them both an opportunity to start anew. As dawn broke and the storm began to subside, emergency responders arrived to assist Karen. Neighbors, hearing about the ordeal, gathered outside, offering words of encouragement and support. For the first time in a long time, Willow Creek felt united, not divided by petty disputes or rigid rules, but bound together by shared humanity. And in that moment, amidst the wreckage and the rain-soaked streets, Jake and Karen took the first tentative steps toward healing wounds neither of them realized ran so deep. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction that stretched across Willow Creek. Streets were littered with debris, broken branches, overturned trash cans, and mud-caked sidewalks told the story of the night's chaos. The air smelled damp and earthy, mingling with the faint scent of gasoline from flooded cars. Neighbors emerged cautiously from their homes, surveying the damage with weary eyes. Some wore boots and gloves, ready to tackle the cleanup. Others simply stood in stunned silence, taking it all in. Karen sat on her porch, wrapped in a thick blanket Jake had lent her earlier. Her hair was still damp, and her clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, but she barely noticed. She stared at the waterlogged lawn, watching as tiny rivulets of rainwater trickled down the driveway. Her mind replayed the events of the previous night over and over again, each memory sharper than the last. She couldn't believe how close she'd come to disaster, or how much she owed Jake for saving her life. Jake, meanwhile, leaned against his truck, which he'd retrieved from the impound lot earlier that morning. He sipped coffee from a thermos, observing the commotion around him. Volunteers moved up and down the street, helping clear fallen trees and pump out flooded basements. Despite the mess, there was an undeniable sense of camaraderie in the air. People who had once avoided eye contact now worked side by side, exchanging smiles and words of encouragement. It was strange, Jake thought, how tragedy could bring people together. As the day wore on, Karen found herself reflecting on her actions. Not just the towing incident, but everything leading up to it. For years, she had prided herself on being the guardian of Willow Creek, the person who kept things running smoothly. But now, sitting amidst the wreckage of her own home, she wondered if she had been more of a burden than a help. Had her obsession with rules pushed people away? Was she truly protecting the neighborhood or just clinging to control? Her thoughts were interrupted when a group of neighbors approached her house, carrying shovels, buckets, and cleaning supplies. Among them was Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman from across the street, who held a tray of homemade muffins. "We heard what happened," Mrs. Henderson said gently, setting the tray on the porch railing. "Thought you might need some extra hands." Karen blinked, unsure how to respond. For so long she had viewed these same neighbors as adversaries, people who didn't appreciate her efforts or follow her lead. Yet, here they were, offering kindness without judgment. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Patel chimed in, flashing a warm smile. "Just let us know where we can help." Overwhelmed, Karen nodded and gestured toward her flooded basement. As the volunteers got to work, she retreated inside, feeling a mix of gratitude and shame. She wanted to join them, to roll up her sleeves and contribute, but something held her back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was fear. Fear of rejection, of facing the very people she had alienated for so long. Outside, Jake watched as the community rallied around Karen. He felt a pang of satisfaction knowing that she was finally getting a taste of the support she had denied others. But instead of gloating, he chose to focus on the bigger picture. The storm had exposed cracks in Willow Creek, not just in its infrastructure but in its relationships. If they were going to rebuild, they needed to start fresh. With that in mind, Jake grabbed a mop and headed into Karen's house. He found her in the kitchen, staring blankly at the counter. "Need a hand?" he asked, holding up the mop. Karen looked startled, then embarrassed. "You've already done enough," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. "I shouldn't have expected you to come back." Jake shrugged, unfazed. "Yeah, well, I'm here now. Might as well make myself useful." Without waiting for permission, he started mopping up the water that had seeped through the floorboards. After a moment of hesitation, Karen joined him, grabbing a towel and kneeling beside him. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the mop and the occasional drip from the ceiling. Finally, Karen broke the quiet. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Save me, I mean. After everything I've done to you?" Jake paused, leaning on the mop handle as he considered his answer. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because no one deserves to be left behind like that, or maybe because I figured this place would be better off if we both stuck around." His words struck a chord with Karen. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. I was wrong about your truck, about the way I treated you, about a lot of things." Jake glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "But you're gonna have to prove it. Actions speak louder than words, right?" Karen nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "I will. Starting today." True to her word, Karen threw herself into the recovery effort. She apologized to her neighbors not just for the towing incident but for years of micromanaging and nitpicking. To everyone's surprise, she stepped down as head of the HOA, handing over the reins to someone else. Instead of enforcing rules, she began volunteering at community events, organizing bake sales and charity drives to raise money for flood repairs. Slowly but surely, her reputation began to change. Jake, too, played a role in healing the rifts within the neighborhood. He organized a car show featuring vintage trucks and classic cars, inviting everyone to attend, not as a jab at Karen, but as a way to celebrate individuality and creativity. Much to his delight, Karen showed up, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, instead of her usual formal attire. She even brought cookies, which earned her teasing cheers from the crowd. The event marked a turning point for Willow Creek. Conversations flowed freely, laughter echoed through the streets, and old grudges began to fade. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. Even the most skeptical residents found themselves warming up to the idea of a more inclusive, compassionate community. In the weeks that followed, Karen made a conscious effort to embrace imperfection. She planted wildflowers in her garden instead of sticking to neatly trimmed hedges. She allowed her mailbox to lean slightly after a strong windstorm, rather than rushing to fix it immediately. And when Jake offered to teach her how to drive his restored truck, one of the few privileges he extended to anyone, she accepted with a nervous laugh. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as they climbed into the cab. "What if I break it?" Jake grinned, handing her the keys. "Then we'll fix it together, that's what neighbors are for." As Karen fumbled with the gear shift, laughing at her own clumsiness, Jake couldn't help but feel hopeful about the future. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, it never had been, but it was stronger now, more resilient. The storm had stripped away, facades revealing the humanity beneath. And though scars remained, they served as reminders of lessons learned. That forgiveness is possible, that second chances matter, and that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories. By the time summer rolled around again, Willow Creek bore little resemblance to the tense, divided neighborhood it had once been. Flowers bloomed in every yard, children played freely in the streets, and neighbors greeted each other with genuine warmth. At the annual block party, Karen stood behind a booth selling lemonade and brownies, chatting easily with passers-by. Nearby, Jake showcased his truck, proudly explaining its history to curious visitors. When the fireworks lit up the sky that evening, casting colorful reflections on smiling faces, Karen caught sight of Jake standing near the edge of the crowd. Smiling, she walked over and handed him a cup of lemonade. "Truce?" she asked, extending the drink. Jake hesitated for a moment, then grinned. "Truce," he replied, clinking his cup against hers. As they stood there, surrounded by friends and neighbors, it became clear that Willow Creek wasn't just a place. It was a community. A flawed, imperfect, beautiful community, bound together not by rules or regulations, but by shared experiences, mutual respect, and the courage to start anew. The block party marked a new chapter for Willow Creek, one that felt lighter and more hopeful than anyone could have imagined just months earlier. The air buzzed with laughter, music, and the tantalizing aroma of grilled burgers and freshly popped popcorn. Strings of twinkling lights crisscrossed between trees, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Children darted around playing tag, their giggles blending with the strumming of an acoustic guitar as Mr. Patel, surprisingly talented, played folksy tunes on a makeshift stage. Karen stood near her lemonade stand, watching the festivities unfold. Her heart swelled with pride, not because she had orchestrated the event for once, but because she was genuinely enjoying being part of it. She caught herself smiling at strangers, engaging in conversations without judgment, and even complimenting Mrs. Henderson's apple pie recipe. It was surreal to think how far she'd come, from the rigid enforcer of rules to someone who simply wanted to belong. Jake noticed Karen from across the lawn, where he was showing off his restored truck to a group of fascinated kids. He chuckled, as they peppered him with questions about engines and horsepower, their faces lighting up with wonder. When he glanced back at Karen, he saw her laughing with a neighbor, her posture relaxed and open in a way he'd never witnessed before. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel proud, not just of saving her during the flood, but of helping spark this transformation. As the evening wore on, Jake wandered over to Karen's booth, drawn by the smell of freshly baked brownies. "You're really going all out tonight," he teased, gesturing to the colorful display of treats. I didn't know you had it in you. Karen rolled her eyes playfully but couldn't hide her grin. Don't act so surprised. I do have skills outside of writing complaint letters, you know. Well, I'll admit these brownies are pretty good, Jake said after taking a bite. Almost makes me forget about the whole towing thing. Karen winced slightly, though. She managed to keep her tone light. Yeah, about that? I still can't believe I did that. You must have thought I was insane. Jake shrugged, leaning casually against the table. Honestly? At first, yeah. I thought you were crazy, but now, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Now I get it. You were trying to protect something important to you. I might not agree with your methods, but I understand why you cared so much. Karen looked at him, surprised by his insight. Thanks for saying that, she said softly. But I also realize now that caring too much about the wrong things can hurt people, and I don't want to be that person anymore. Their conversation was interrupted when a little girl tugged on Jake's sleeve. Can we sit in the truck again? She asked eagerly, pointing toward the gleaming red Ford parked nearby. Jake laughed and nodded, ruffling her hair as she scampered off with her friends. Watching the scene unfold, Karen felt a pang of curiosity. So what's it like driving that thing? She asked hesitantly. Do you ever let amateurs take it for a spin? Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Are you asking me to teach you how to drive it? Karen flushed, suddenly self-conscious. Maybe. I mean, it's probably a terrible idea, but I guess I'm trying to step out of my comfort zone. You know, embrace new experiences. Jake grinned, amused by her sudden interest. All right. Deal. But only if you promise not to tow my truck afterward. Karen laughed, the sound genuine and melodic. Fair enough. The next weekend, Jake kept his promise. They met early Saturday morning in an empty parking lot behind the local community center. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden rays over the asphalt. Karen approached nervously, clutching a borrowed pair of sunglasses and wearing sneakers that looked oddly out of place with her usual polished appearance. You sure about this? Jake asked, tossing her the keys. It's not exactly beginner-friendly. Karen swallowed hard but nodded. Let's do it. For the next hour, Jake patiently guided her through the basics of driving a manual transmission. Karen struggled at first, stalling the engine multiple times and accidentally revving it louder than intended. Each mistake made her wince, but Jake remained encouraging, offering tips and reassurance. You're doing great, he said after she successfully shifted into second gear without jerking the truck forward. See? Not so scary. By the end of the lesson, Karen had managed to drive a full loop around the lot, albeit slowly and cautiously. As she pulled back into the starting position, she turned to Jake with a triumphant smile. I did it. I actually drove your precious truck without destroying it. Jake laughed, clapping her on the shoulder. Told you it wasn't impossible. Maybe someday you'll be cruising down Maple Lane in style. Karen shook her head, still grinning. One step at a time, Jake. One step at a time. Over the following weeks, their newfound friendship continued to grow. They began running into each other more often, at the grocery store, at the mechanic shop where Jake worked, or during evening walks around the neighborhood. Their conversations started small, focusing on trivial topics like weather or TV shows, but gradually deepened. Karen opened up about her insecurities, admitting that she had always feared losing control, not just of the HOA, but of her life. Jake shared stories about his childhood, growing up in a tight-knit family that valued creativity and resilience. Through these exchanges, they discovered common ground. Both had experienced loss, Karen the death of her husband years ago, which left her clinging to routine as a source of stability. Jake, the estrangement from his father, whose disapproval of his passion for cars had driven a wedge between them. These vulnerabilities brought them closer, transforming their relationship from reluctant allies to trusted confidants. Word of their budding friendship spread quickly through Willow Creek, sparking curiosity among neighbors. Some were skeptical, wondering if this truce would last, while others cheered it on, seeing it as proof that change was possible. Even Mrs. Henderson joked about organizing a matchmaking dinner, though both Karen and Jake quickly shut down the idea, insisting they were simply friends. Despite the teasing, their bond strengthened the fabric of the community. Inspired by their example, other residents began reaching out to mend old feuds and bridge divides. A young couple who had been feuding with their next-door neighbors over property lines invited them over for dinner. An elderly man who rarely left his house started attending book club meetings after Karen personally delivered an invitation. Slowly but surely, Willow Creek became a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. One crisp autumn afternoon, the neighborhood came together for another event, a massive yard sale aimed at raising funds for a local charity. Tables lined the streets, piled high with everything from vintage records to hand-knitted scarves. Karen manned a booth selling homemade candles while Jake helped set up a car wash station using his tools and expertise. As the day drew to a close, Karen sought out Jake near the refreshment stand. She held 2 cups of hot cider, steam curling, into the cool air. Handing one to him, she smiled shyly. "Just wanted to say thanks. For everything. If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd be here right now." Literally or figuratively. Jake sipped his cider, considering her words. "We're all works in progress, Karen. I'm just glad you decided to give people and yourself a second chance." They stood there quietly for a moment, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Around them, neighbors laughed and chatted, united by shared purpose and mutual respect. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was alive with possibility, built on forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to grow. And as Karen and Jake walked side by side back toward their homes, neither could deny that the journey ahead promised to be brighter and far more rewarding than either had ever imagined.